Well, if you know me, you know that I'm a student of history, especially movie history. So I think it's time that we talk about the history of nudity at the movies. Welcome to the Film Threat Podcast. I am Chris Gore. I am pleased to talk to the filmmakers behind Skin, A History of Nudity in the Movies. I have director Danny Wolf with me today and producer Paul Fishbein. First of all, I can tell from watching this movie that it was a labor of love.
Yes,
for sure. But to let people know about this documentary, it really takes a deep dive. Yes, you could discuss the salacious details of, there's nudity in this documentary, but it really is amazing things that I didn't know about the early history of cinema, how nudity was treated in films, some of the key milestones. You also interviewed everybody, experts, people who've been on camera nude and how that was accepted, the differences between male and female nudity. Where did this project come from? How did you pull it together?
We had just finished shooting Time Warp, the greatest cult films of all time. And we loved the whole idea of talking about movie history. And we had just done the history of cult films. And we were wondering, what subject could we do? And our friend, Jim McBride, Mr. Skin, was celebrating his 20th anniversary. So I called him on the phone and I said, has anybody ever done a documentary on you? And he goes, well, it's not that interesting. And then I think it was Danny who said, wait, I got a better idea. Let's talk about the history of nudity. And then instead of thinking about Mr. Skin, he can be a subject. And then he came on as a producer as well, and he is a subject in the film. But it became a much more serious, much more academic and non-salacious documentary, with still containing all the nudity and everything in it.
Yeah, that was one of the discussions we had, Chris. Sorry, up front.
No, yeah, sure, please.
We didn't want to do something exploitive.
Right.
That wasn't our goal, and it didn't turn out that way, and we were conscious of that all the way. We really wanted this to be something not just entertaining, but educational. So really, a definitive history from the beginning of film, 1887, to now where we're at with the Me Too movement and everything in between. So, it was conscious on all our behalfs to really we didn't want a boob fest. That's not the goal, and that's not what it is. There's great nudity in it, and it's really fun. But I think to set it all up, it's everything from the beginning to the end. And, this is something, as some reviewers have said, could be shown in a film studies, in colleges, in cinema classes.
Yeah,
that's the ultimate compliment to us.
Yeah, I thought that too. You really go over like the introduction of the X rating and Midnight Cowboy and some of those key moments. I find it fascinating that Mr. Skin is in this movie. He's finally in a movie that he could put on his site that he's in. It's very... It's very meta that way. I'm familiar with Mr. Skin because I've heard him interviewed on the Howard Stern show, and he's great on Stern. He really, the level of detail, and they've even played like a trivia game with him. But I like that he's a part of this, right? But you really, you've also covered, right up to the present day with how the Me Too movement has affected nudity in films. What were some of the, I'm sure that just like the exhaustive research in terms of putting this together, there's some stuff from the early history of film that I was completely unaware of. How were you able to pull together all these clips?
Well, we are good at this. Danny, myself, Christine Augustin, our supervising producer, we've been doing it for a long time. I've been doing documentaries like this even longer. We did hire some pretty good researchers, Mike McPadden and Matthew Klickstein. The man known as Celebrity Sleuth gave us his archives of nudity from the early days to history. So we did our own research. We called on people. We had experts. We read every book that was out there. We read the Thomas Doherty book, the Mick LaSalle book on, femme fatales. And we kind of managed over a few months to just get our storyline in order.
Danny,
The storyline is on this wall.
Yeah,
really? Is that really behind you? That's it.
Actually, can you move your computer? No. Okay. That's only half the wall. That's the actual breakdown of the movie.
Oh my God.
We won't take it down until we do another one. We're working on. Then we'll take that down and we'll put our next movie up there. But we work very old school that way, and we piece it together, and it's the way you do it.
Well, tell me, like, putting together a documentary like this, because it really is, it's like 100 years of cinema history packed into this. And it's fascinating when you go through just the rating system, how that developed, the Hays Code, all of those kinds of things. Like it's 100 years, and nudity is sort of the gateway into it. But really, it's like a reflection of how audiences' tastes have changed also when it comes to nudity, and also the differences between male and female nudity, and how that's played. So that's just for my own curiosity. So that's the what you have on that back wall. You don't use a traditional screenplay. These are story threads that you've put up there. I love learning about different processes for documentary filmmakers.
We really broke it up by the decades. We wanted to do this chronologically because it would be easy to tell the story, because it changed that thread. And, the first film was Edward Muybridge, which we cover, the body in motion. And it was nudity on horses. And that was a great, starting spot. And then to move through, the 1920s, every major actress in Hollywood was doing nudity. That was a crazy time. I mean, you had, even Hedy Lamarr, who was a world phenomenon, actress doing full nudity, and Claudette Colbert, and all these other, Annette Kellerman, and it was interesting to go into the 20s about how nudity was fine and everything. Then in the 30s, this code starts, which a lot of people who think they know film history don't know there was a production code. And this was when religion entered, and the Catholic Church and the Catholic Legion of Decency basically became, the first form of censorship in U.S. cinema. And there were decades, which we cover in the 30s, 40s, into the 50s, where no nudity, or your movie wasn't going to play in theaters.
Except for the outlaw filmmakers, right, Danny? The outlaw filmmakers.
Like Russ Meyer and Doris Wishman and Herschel Gordon Lewis and even Howard Hughes were kind of breaking the code. They weren't going to get the distribution because they weren't abiding by these strict, the Hays Code, these production code rules. But there were these outlaw filmmakers making monster nudies and nudie cuties and natural, nature films. And then kind of when the 60s hit, the code was crumbling. No one was abiding by it anymore. And really it was about 1968 where Easy Rider and Midnight Cowboy, and that kind of opened up Hollywood. And we jump in, we do the 68, and we do the 70s with the blaxploitation and the women in prison films, and really hit hard the early 80s teen sex comedies, all the way through where we are today with the Me Too movement. So we were very conscious to make every decade count, and kind of not just where cinema was, but where our world was and where politics was. And what was changing in America at the time was changing with movies. So that's when we say this really is a historical, educational documentary. It's not just, breasts, even though that's, the key element.
Well, there are breasts in the movie. Yes.
There are breasts, there are penises, and there are vaginas.
There's everything. I mean,
there's everything.
God did a really good job. I have to give him or her or this entity credit. So what I love about this thing is it could have been a series. I mean, really, you give this overview, and it's encyclopedic. It's encyclopedic in terms of the amount of information. It could well have been a series. I'm curious, just for yourselves personally, because there are some documentaries that make money, but the documentary filmmakers that I know are passionate people. None of them have butlers, as far as I know. They're not. You're not getting rich from doing a doc. So it's a labor of love. It's a passion. My first recollection of seeing nudity at the cinema was a surprise. It was the movie Logan's Run with Jenny Agutter. and I saw it 3 times. I remember my mom dropping me off at the movie theater. I mean, I love the film for other reasons. There's, that Box, the robot, played by Roscoe Lee Brown, but there's also just this surprise nudity, and the way that sex is played in it, I thought is very mature. Even when you look back on that movie, and production value wise, special effects, it doesn't hold up. But then my other thing was Fast Times at Ridgemont High, and I'm so glad that you include that, Phoebe Cates. Can you recount for me, just from a personal standpoint, because this is not in the documentary, I mean, Paul, you have a very storied career, being involved in things that involve nudity. I'll leave it at that. But can you talk about like when you first saw nudity in the cinema and how that affected you?
You can go first, Danny.
It's funny you bring that up, Chris, because Paul's idea was, let's start this documentary with some of our actors and actresses talking about the first time they saw nudity. So we made sure to ask everybody we interviewed, when was the first time you saw nudity?
The most memorable one for me was the one that's in our film. That was the X-rated Alice in Wonderland, because I was 17 and I took a date there, a girl that I liked, and I had never seen pornography. So for me, it was like, oh my God. And it was meeting Christine DeBelle all these years later, it was like surrealistic for me. But I think, we used to go to drive-ins as kids, but that's the one that I remember the most.
Yeah, for me also, Flesh Gordon was another one that was, I mean, these were kind of cheesy. And there was another one, the first nudie musical.
I remember that.
I remember that one. It wasn't it wasn't pornographic. There was nudity in it. I just, and it is actually, it's as described, it is a musical. What has been the reaction of people to this? I think we live in very sensitive times. And I think in a sense, very puritanical times. I think the 70s was sort of a highlight where there could be an adult approach. I'm referencing movies like, for example, Midnight Cowboy or Last Tango in Paris with Marlon Brando. I mean, these movies, there were nudity in the film, but it was done in a way that was adult, and I feel that we've lost some of that. Where having nudity in a film in today's society, I feel like the pendulum is becoming more puritanical, and it's a little distressing where we can't have a conversation about sex in an adult way in a movie that discusses issues, especially now when there is so much, gender fluidity is now a part of the conversation, and LGBTQ, and I just, when is this puritanical stuff going to end so we can actually begin to have more adult films? And by adult, I actually don't mean pornography. I mean films like Last Tango in Paris.
Well, I'll answer both your first question about the reaction. Well, it comes out August 18th on VOD, on Amazon, iTunes, Apple, Vudu, Fandango, wherever people rent movies. Then I'll tell you what the reaction was.
Okay.
The critical reaction is going to be good, because we've gotten tons of comments back from critics that have said good things about it. So we think we're going to have a good critical reaction. How the public perceives it, I don't know. Danny, you want to take part 2 about when society is going to change and we're not going to be as puritanical here in America?
But the thing is, nudity is not going away, and you're seeing more of it now than ever because of streaming. Because you have a Game of Thrones on HBO that has nudity in every episode. And those are mini movies every episode. Mm-hmm. Or your Hulus and Amazons and Netflix. There's more nudity. It's more prevalent now than I think it's ever.
But on television, though. But on television, which you never had before. Right.
So it's something that's not going away. I think the approach to nudity is changing in a lot of different ways. You have CGI. Now an actress or an actor has the right to not do nudity and will appear nude in the movie because it's CGI and you'll never know it. Body doubles basically are going away because of CGI. You don't even need prosthetics anymore. So, things are changing. And we wanted to go all the way up through today, and we do that in the doc with, now there's an intimacy coordinator that's on the set of films. We interview Alicia Rodas, and her job is to be on the set of movies being made today where actors and actresses, when they're doing nudity or sex scenes, they're done accurately, they're done in good taste, they're not treated badly, the director's not getting out of line. They're almost like an insurance policy for not only the actor and actress, but the studio. So lawsuits don't pop up. So, you're seeing changes made. I think an intimacy director in the age of Me Too is incredible, and I think it's incredibly helpful for everyone involved in making movies. So when there is nudity and sex, it's done artistically correct, and
the performers are protected.
yeah,
Right,
and
right.
exactly, and they're protected, and that's where we're at today. So I mean, yeah, nudity's not going away. I think, you know, it's here to stay for forever. We're still maybe behind Europe by 10 years, as
Right.
far as people still being crude, a little prudish. Not just the American sensibility, you know. Pam Grier says, you know, in the 50s and 60s, there were European art films with nudity. There's television that they have nudity in Europe, and we've just always sort of been behind the curve there.
Mm-hmm.
But it's what really makes this documentary, and you touched on the 70s and 80s, and what one very important thing we wanted to cover in this was, how did nudity affect not only the actor or actress's career, but their personal life. And we got great stories about how nudity affected their personal life. And Erica Gavin, who starred in the movie Vixen, you know, goes to the premiere of her movie in New York and sees herself for the first time on the big screen and starts picking herself apart, to then almost dying of anorexia. So it's the stories really also drive this documentary on how nudity affected, again, not just their career, but their personal life. Career-wise, a Shannon Elizabeth, if she didn't do nudity, she said she may not have a career. And American Pie sort of put her on the map. Or an interesting, like a Serena Vincent, who starred in Not Another Teen Movie, who's naked throughout the whole movie, and it's a comedy. But here's an actress that wasn't ready for the backlash.
Right.
And being a Power Ranger and a kid star, receiving hate mail from all over the world saying, how are you? You're a Power Ranger. What are you doing nudity for? And she said it really hurt her and her personal life by getting so much hate mail. So the documentary, again, being informative and covering the history of, you know, the decades of nudity movies. It's really the personal stories of these actors and actresses and how it really affected them.
Right.
They're really, the stories are pretty powerful.
Well, I really want to thank you, both of you, for delivering an amazing documentary that is a slice of film history that we need to have a discussion more about. I do miss the days of the Russ Meyer movies. I think the Russ Meyer movies were simultaneously exploitation films and female empowerment all at once. I feel like he's underappreciated director. Paul Fishbein, Danny Wolf, thank you so much for being on the Film Threat podcast. I also want to thank our sponsor, Storyblocks. Go to storyblocks.com/filmthread. All kinds of tools for filmmakers, especially documentary filmmakers. And I wish you success on this movie.
Thank you. We appreciate it.
Skin, A History of Nudity in the Movies will be on iTunes and everywhere VOD August 18th. Thank you guys for being on the Film Threat podcast. It's a pleasure. Paul, it's great to see you again.
Yeah, it's been a long time. Thank you so much for having us.
Thank you, Chris.